I'm asked to talk about treaties, their impact, and moving forward. And Grand Chief Norton mentioned one type of treaty. There really are, I categorize three types of treaties. The early peace and friendship treaties, they call them, or actually they're political, military, international treaties from the 16 and 1700s, the very early treaties, which were not land cession treaties. Treaties like the covenant chain that Grand Chief Norton referred to. One of the more famous ones is the Treaty of Niagara, 1764, issued shortly after or entered into by many nations in North America. Entered into after the Royal Proclamation was issued. It's written about extensively. It's been in the courts. Courts have acknowledged the significance of that. Excuse me, the significance of that treaty. It was a time when the covenant chain, which is reflected in the wampum belt that Grand Chief Norton presented, was extended. The covenant chain was extended from the Haudenosaunee and the British to the Anishinaabe nations, or the Western Confederacy is what they call them, covering much of what is now Ontario, but certainly beyond Ontario as well, into the mid-northern U.S. And you've got as well the maritime peace and friendship treaties, which are around the same time, 1700s. Those aren't like land cession treaties. Then you have the treaties from starting, I guess, in Ontario, which began to focus on a kind of land cession. And in my area, for example, we have the Robinson Treaties, meant north of Lake Huron and Lake Superior. And those kind of set the stage for the numbered treaties on the prairies. So that's the other kind of treaty, the land cession treaties. And the elders will always tell you, and Noel will tell you this, that the written text of the treaties that is published are not what was thought to be in the treaties. And you always hear about the spirit and intent, which is what I guess the First Nation or the Indigenous understanding of those treaties was. It wasn't to surrender or cede or extinguish, because that's really what started to creep into the practice. You go from the covenant chain, the two-row wampum, and the Niagara Treaty. Then you get into when North America started to become more and more populated. They needed land, so then they started to take land. And then you get the Indian Act introduced, and you get assimilation and this effort, which wound up in residential schools, really to do away with the Indians. So the treaties are certainly important. My own treaty, the Robinson-Huron Treaty, we've launched major litigation in the Ontario courts. There's a clause in our treaty that talks about we get an annuity in our treaty of $4 per year. Whoop-de-doo, right? Anyway, there's a clause in the treaty that says, but if the treaty territory is able to generate enough profit, then you'll get more. Well, it got increased once in 1874, never got increased again. And they've certainly generated a lot of revenue from the territory, right? Well, we've litigated we're in court with the Crown on that one, and what's their response was, well, that wasn't really a legal obligation, right? It was just a discretionary, was our discretion. We decided we don't want to pay you, or ex gratia is the Latin term. So those are the kind of things, when you think about how Indigenous people, First Nations people got so kind of economically depressed in this country. Over a period of several hundred years, you have things like that occurring. You get commitments to share the land from the First Nation peoples, then promises that were made, then they don't get honored, right? Like, at that point in time, William Benjamin Robinson, who was the Treaty Commissioner, said, we don't have a lot of money right now, right? The province of Canada, which is what it was in 1850, was basically broke. And they were trying to borrow money from the UK. Of course, they couldn't. And so when Robinson went out and said, you know, we can't afford more than this right now, guys, chiefs, Shingwakus, a famous chief from Garden River, and there was a number of chiefs that were actually were demonstrating at the time. They were actually not demonstrating, they were protecting their land rights. They blocked they started mining exploration in the Robinson-Huron Superior Treaty areas, and the chiefs stopped them effectively and sent them away. So they petitioned the Governor General, and the Governor General sent out commissioners to study the claims of the Indians and to enter into treaties. So I guess what we really need to see in terms of treaties is moving beyond just a rhetoric. That's what I said at the beginning. Moving beyond, reconciliation. One thing I will agree with the Right Honorable Paul Martin on is the word reconciliation. I think it's a nice word, but it is really kind of ambiguous and a bit slippery. And if you're already dispossessed, reconciliation has the potential to perpetuate the status quo. And one of the things that Charlie Angus has mentioned in his presentation, and I'm involved in that on behalf of the Assembly of First Nations in that child welfare litigation that Cindy Blackstock is involved with. There's a real refusal on the part of government to move on changing, even though they've gotten an order from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal that there's systemic discrimination against First Nations children on reserve. There's a refusal to remedy it. They've been ordered, but they refuse to remedy it. So what do you do? I mean, that's the challenge, I guess. What I would put to all the bright people here, to the Jesuit order, like how do you turn the corner on getting people to start walking the talk? We had Paul Martin here, and I agree fully with a lot of the things that he said. But Paul Martin was also the finance minister who instituted the 2% cap, which is still plaguing First Nations. In fact, I like Paul. I was involved with the Liberal Party at one point until we decided to burn the Red Book. After they got elected, they refused to implement the things, right? But that's politics, I guess. Anyway, so Paul he's doing some great things now, and I wish he would have said, I put the 2% cap on. It's still there, and I think it's one of the things that's impeding the ability of government to properly fund child welfare. Charlie Angus, I looked at an exchange that he had with the minister in the standing committee the other day, and he referenced a document that he got from Indian Affairs which shows that they haven't increased the funding beyond 2% since they first implemented it. So it's still with us, right? So how do you move government beyond, move them out of their status quo, systemically racist, discriminatory way that they are? I mean, the only the only thing I can do is sue the bastards, right? Anyway, appreciate it. Thank you very much.